Merry Christmas and welcome to the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff along with William Swig. William, how are you?
I'm doing well, and Merry Christmas to you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a good time of year. I grew up Jewish. They do the Hanukkah thing, but we always just kind of did both. So
Well, happy Hanukkah then.
I appreciate that. I was always against those, the happy holidays. They started that when I was a kid. I was just like, please don't make any special fuss over the Jewish kid. I like Christmas carols. So
Yeah.
I like Christmas.
It's all good cheer, happy holidays.
Exactly.
And, happy New Year as well.
Thank you. So one of my favorite movies of all time is a Christmas movie. It's a Wonderful Life. And being an Ayn Rand fan and in the objectivist world, if you will, that is actually a contentious position because there are a lot of objectivists that don't like It's a Wonderful Life and see it as altruism.
Yeah, I think that you hear Yaron Brook talk about this on his show. I think he talked about it in 2018 on his radio program. And then a year ago, he talked about it on his podcast. And he was just asked about it again on his podcast a couple of days ago. So he has some pretty strong opinions about It's a Wonderful Life. I think that he's focusing too much on one small aspect of the film that isn't really a dominant theme. And he's missing the larger picture and the more dominant themes, which we will get into. And I think that we also have some clips from Yaron that we're going to analyze and discuss.
That's right. And most of these clips are going to come from his Christmas Eve show of 2020, where he discusses what he doesn't like about the movie in detail. And I thought we'd just go over some of those clips and just analyze it and see where, we have a different view. I just think that the movie is really a lot about free will. It's about how much the choices that we make influence things, that when they show him what his life wouldn't have been like, I mean, there's such a difference in terms of, how the town had changed. And it's a ode to how much choices and each individual matters in the big scheme of things, that it's all connected, like Rand said.
Yeah, and that's a dominant theme, which I think some objectivists overlook. Frank Capra said it himself. Frank Capra directed the movie. He said that it was about the power of the individual and the importance of the individual. And he really tried to show that. He was a religious person, but he did try to focus on the individuality and tried to show this one man, George Bailey, and his one life, showing how it affected all of the people around him, his town, and the impact his one life had on the world, in his community. But not just in his community, because he saved his brother, and his brother went on to fight a war. And he saves other people and helps them out, and they go on and they leave town and they do great things. So Frank Capra is trying to show the effects of one man's choice. But as you say, it is about choice, because all the major scenes involve him making difficult choices. He has to choose whether to leave town or stay in town, essentially. And he's always choosing to stay in his town. I think that relates to another theme, which I think a lot of objectivists miss, which is this conflict between a man's desire for adventure versus his desire to make a home and stay in a town and build up the town. So George is always talking about how he wants to run off and see the world and have a harem of wives and do all these crazy things. But then when it comes down to the hard choices, he's always choosing to save his town or to save somebody else in his town.
Yeah, he reassesses his hierarchy of values. Well, let's listen to Yaron's critique, and I think that gets into many of the issues you're starting to get into.
My primary objection to It's a Wonderful Life is it tries to have its cake and eat it too. It creates a character who is fundamentally altruistic. He is the epitome of altruism. He is the epitome of somebody who does not pursue his values, who does not rashly conceive of what will lead him to be happy and go out and achieve it.
So this is a very objectivist perspective. I don't think it's actually the theme of the movie or the essence of George Bailey's character. George Bailey is not an altruist. He's not always thinking about other people or doing everything for other people. His central conflict is within himself, within his own hierarchy of values. He is a boy in the beginning. This movie tracks George Bailey's life from boyhood to manhood and into his business and his family. So what is happening in this movie is that George Bailey is realizing what is important to him. He's realizing that his boyhood values are not his manhood values. He once dreamed of doing crazy things. He would say, I'm going to lasso the moon for you. He was a fanciful person. He was a dreamer.
Right. And those dreams have to be tied to reality.
Right. And he then was faced with reality, with depression, with the Great Depression, with the war. He was faced with concrete things that affected his choices, and he had to make practical, reasonable choices that protected his core values, which was his family and his community and himself. He had to make sure that he didn't go off and do something stupid. So he stayed home and he saved the bank. And one of the things about this idea that he ran the bank in an altruistic way, he didn't do that either. What he did is his goal was to save the building and loan so that people didn't have to crawl to Henry Potter. He actually valued competition. So in a way, he was like promoting free market. He didn't want this one man to have a monopoly over all of the building in the community. He wanted to give his friends and his people in his community a chance to build a home without having to crawl to Potter and live in a slum.
Yeah, I think there's a huge distinction between altruism and benevolence that, frankly, some objectivists blur, and they can't see that there's, being kind or wanting to help your friends, and that's not inherently altruistic. It's, I mean, what Yaron does after that clip is he actually goes into a litany of charges against George's supposed altruism, as if he's on some sort of objectivist trial, like someone in the Collective in the 60s. But, he's saying that George is for not doing whatever he felt like in light of new context. Like you said, he tells Mary as a boy that, he wants to have a couple of harems and maybe 3 or 4 wives. So, these are not realistic goals. And Yaron complains that George didn't go to Paris. Like, things came up. His father died. He wanted his brother to be happy and successful. Then he wanted to save the building and the loan. Or that he married his high school sweetheart, even though he wanted to travel first. I mean, sometimes that makes sense. One of Yaron's complaints is that he took over the family business, even though he didn't want to at first. He's still planning to leave George's when he tells the board, this town needs the building and loan, like you said, to have some place where they don't have to come without crawling to Potter. And so then after his speech, the board votes to keep the building and loan, but only on the condition that he'll take his father's place as the head. George has a cab waiting for him to take him to college finally. And it's a test of his integrity to choose the higher value. And I think he does.
Yeah. So that's an important point, because in that scene, it shows that events are happening to George where he has to make a hard choice. So it kind of reflects, it possibly reflects a contrivance on the writer of the story. You know, he's contriving events to keep George in town. But that's kind of what art is. You know, you got to contrive a plot to bring your theme to life. So
Right.
So one could argue that George is giving up something for the bank to keep his father's crummy business alive. But one could also say that someone could look at what George is actually saying in the movie and come to the conclusion that he actually values the building and loan because he values a town where Potter isn't in charge of everything. And the problem with the focus on giving up one value for another is that it doesn't recognize this contrivance and what the contrivance of the plot is trying to elicit or trying to show. I think what it's trying to show is that George is conflicted within himself, within his own values. He's trying to figure out what his values are. He's saying one thing, but doing another. So he's saying he wants to leave, but really he's staying. He's doing what he wants to do. It's the movie's about him realizing that he has all these dreams that aren't what he really wants. He really wants to stay in town, have a wife, you know, build things in his town, build up his community.
It's not even that he didn't have those dreams. It's just that sometimes, you know, other things come into play that make you reassess the value of each dream. And, you know, making those choices is what life is all about.
Yeah, that's an aspect of it. I mean, that's kind of what the contrivance is about. It's putting George in that difficult choice. He has to choose what is the higher value. Like if the town were perfect and didn't need George, he could run off to Europe. But the town isn't perfect and it needs George. So yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, part of it is it's almost like, you know, how the left will say, well, you can't have movies that reinforce these stereotypes, or, you know, you can't have a black guy be the villain or whatever the PC rules are these days. And it's almost applied with to objectivism, where they're like, you know, he can't be conflicted about his values.
Yeah.
Or he's bad. The contrivances shouldn't have been in there for him is almost an implied assumption.
Right. And I can understand that if you only see the religious element of the movie, you could interpret the contrivances as trying to promote altruism. But there's a whole nother aspect to this that I don't think objectivists see. And it's the idea that George is not only a Christ figure, he's a Tom Sawyer figure. And the movie brings this out by having Clarence, the guardian angel, carry around a copy of Tom Sawyer. And he actually gives that copy of Tom Sawyer to George Bailey in the end as a Christmas gift. And what he inscribes in the book is he writes, those who have, no man is a failure who has friends. I think that's more to the core of the theme than altruism. It's about having relationships and the value of your community. So in the end, everyone comes to his rescue. And why do they come to his rescue? Because he came to their rescue. It was a trade. It was a trade, value for value. He helped them, they helped him. It's
mutual benevolence. No one told them to. They didn't need a government edict. They just wanted to help him, and they felt good about it.
They helped him because he's a good guy. He has goodwill. He's the essence of what Christmas is about. It's about goodwill. It's about loving everybody and giving gifts to everybody. He gives out loans. He's a building and loan banker type, and he's always, instead of in some of the scenes where he's giving out loans, he specifically says this is not a payment from your account. It's a loan. Your account is still with us, when he's saving people from the Depression.
Right.
So he's represented as this capitalist. He's an exchanger, value for value. I'm giving you a loan and then you pay me back later. So I think go ahead.
I was just going to say, Yaron doesn't see that distinction. Yaron says that he's an altruist through and through because he's not clearly identified his values.
So a man who is an altruist through and through, because he has not clearly identified his values and therefore has not pursued them. And yet, in spite of that, and in spite of the consequence of that, and the consequence of that are, let's be clear, that he's ready to commit suicide. He's ready to jump off a bridge. In spite of that, the movie suggests that he's lived an amazing life.
There's no real nuance to his position. He says George is an altruist through and through. It's like there's no complexity to George, when clearly George is a complex character. He's saying one thing and doing another. In the midst of kissing Mary, he's saying he doesn't want any of it. I mean, he's presented as a mixed up character until the end, where he figures things out.
Right. How much he values his life.
Yeah.
But I just don't know, who anyone is to tell a man he hasn't lived an amazing life without knowing what he's experienced, just because it wasn't his original childhood dreams, like having a harem or being a firefighter. I just think, and just to a factual point about what Yaron says, George was actually very happy. He was thrilled, seemingly with his life, the morning before that money was lost by his Uncle Billy. Of course, his brother was coming back and he's excited about this, but they very deliberately show that this is not a man that is, hates his life before this happens.
Now show him what happened today.
Yes, sir. This morning, day before Christmas, about 10 a.m. Bedford Falls time.
Oh, hey, Ernie! Look at that!
It's gonna snow again.
What do you mean it's gonna snow? Look at the headline there. President
I know, George, and it's marvelous. Commander Harry Bailey.
Oh, Mr. Gower, look at this. The second time. Well, look, this is for you. This is for you. Okay. That's for you.
Right.
There you go.
Yeah, he was very happy. His life was going well. He built Bailey Park. He was building up his community. He was happily married. He had a bunch of kids that he loved. So he was happy. And so one of the things that Yaron says or tries to imply is that George Bailey wanted to commit suicide because he's altruistic and his altruism led to his depression and all that. But that's not what happened. In the movie, his uncle loses a bank deposit, and it's a tragic accident where he unthinkingly gives the money to the enemy, Mr. Potter, and then he forgets where he put the money and runs around trying to find it, and the Baileys can't find the money, and then George gets more and more distraught, and he realizes that this is going to mean scandal and prison, and he doesn't want to bring that upon himself or his family or his community. So that's why he's depressed, and that's why he wants to commit suicide, because he thinks his life is over.
There were lots of stories during the Depression of people jumping out windows, and it was meant to kind of allude to that, and people relate to it. And that's what was going on with him. But it was strictly, it wasn't because he was all of a sudden regretting all of his life choices because $8,000 went missing.
Yeah, I mean, his uncle didn't give the money in an altruistic way. It was just an accident. It was a mistake. So it really drives home the theme of these difficult situations and having to make choices in difficult situations. And this is the most difficult situation where what do you do when you're facing prison time? You know, you have to make this hard choice. Do you start to go through options and fight any way you can to make it, you know, go away or to solve the problem, or do you just end your life? And you know, that's why his guardian angel steps in, because George is confused and doesn't know the right path. So he needs help, and that also reinforces the theme of, you know, his savior type theme, where his guardian angel comes in to rescue him.
Right. Well, and we're gonna touch on that scene in just a moment. Yaron ends up claiming that George can't be happy, that it's almost an affront to him that George is happy with what he's judged to be an altruistic lifestyle.
And the movie ends with everybody coming together, saving his butt. Everybody loves him. He's wonderful. He's going to live happily ever after. No, he's not. He just tried to commit suicide for a really good reason. Because he has no values, and the values he used to have, he gave up. He didn't plan his life. He didn't shape his soul. He didn't shape his future. It just happened.
I mean, he appears to be saying that if your values change, you're a sellout.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't appreciate the whole arc of the story, which is that it's about realizing what's really valuable in life. And it's not these childhood pipe dreams. It's, you know, it's making a home, it's finding your love, it's raising your children, it's running a good business that's not just profitable, but also meaningful to your community and you know, has some value to you and your values. And George's values weren't you know, bleeding his customers dry for every dime he could get out of them. It was making sure that they were happy and they came to a mutual benefit. So he got what he needed to live, and they got what they needed to live happily. So
that's right.
Yeah.
Now,
go ahead.
You've got to hear this assertion about how he thinks the movie could have been better.
Now, if the movie had ended with him jumping off the bridge, I would have rated it as a great movie.
So much for life is the standard.
Yeah, well, it's also inaccurate because he did jump off the bridge. He jumped off to save Clarence. So he's trying to make a point that it would have been better if George had died. And that's pretty negative and malevolent, in my opinion. I don't think, you know, I'm not going to wish someone death, even if it's a fictional character, unless they're an actual true villain. I mean, why didn't he wish Henry Potter to die? Henry Potter almost practically ruined Bailey's life by taking advantage of a tragic mistake. I mean, what kind of person would do that? That person deserves to die. So I think that he's trying to make, you know, first of all, it's kind of just an off the cuff remark, I think. So I don't know how much to take it seriously, but if George Bailey had died and actually committed suicide, there wouldn't be a whole point to the movie. I mean, that the whole point of the movie is leading up to him realizing that his real values are his town and his family and all of that.
He's more interested in like an artistic justice to the movie. So because he's deemed Bailey as an altruist, he deserves to die, and death is what he should seek as an anti-life soul.
Right. Yeah, I don't really know how much else I can say about it. I mean, it's just,
well,
why? I mean, I've never really heard that sort of negative take on the movie. You know, why would you want him to jump off the bridge and die? It's just crazy.
Well, Yaron, going back to your point about Capra, Yaron says that George doesn't have his own values, and also says that that's a pattern of the director.
You have the pretense of that he's going to live happily ever after. No, there's no way that can happen. He is an empty, soulless, valueless person. His values are secondhand. His values are just the values that the society provided him, that the family enforced on him. His values as an individual are zilch, nothing, non-existence. It was made by Frank Capra, who very much had this sense of America, this sense of altruism.
I'm not an expert on Frank Capra, but I have seen the movie several times now, and I don't see what you're on saying in the actual plot and characterizations in the movie. I think that George does express his values. He's not a soulless, valueless person. He's a confused, like I've been saying, he's a mixed up, confused person who has these conflicting values, which he's struggling to prioritize. And in one of the scenes, he makes it a point where he's trying to save the bank from Potter, and his father's still alive, and they're having an argument with Potter. And he's saying something like, we need this building and loan, this crummy building and loan, if only to have a place for people to go without crawling to Henry Potter. So he's actually kind of has a philosophical view on the need for the building and loan. And that's a value to him.
No one told him to have that value. He realized it.
Yeah, he realized it. He articulated it. And he also expresses to his father that he thinks his father's a good guy. He has values. He's valuing his family. He thinks Mary is he's in love with Mary. She's a value. He respects his mother's opinion. At some point, his mother tells him to run off and, go see Mary, and he does. She convinces him to marry Mary. So and he loves his town, and he stays in his town. The classic scene from the movie is him running through his town, saying how much he loves all the buildings and the people there. So, and he's wishing them all Merry Christmas. It says, I don't know how you can come to the conclusion that this is going to be a miserable guy in the future. Yeah, he might have misfortunes and have to struggle through them, but with the new perspective he has, granted from a miraculous event involving the angel, but he now has this new perspective on his life, and it looks to me like he has a lot of values now.
Absolutely. And now in this next clip, Yaron complains about the portrayal of Potter, the banker.
If you think about the banker who's the bad guy, well, he's the one who's actually foreclosing and people can't pay their loans. I mean, what else is he supposed to do? But he's made out to be a thief in order to nail him.
Yeah, there is some negative characterization of Potter, but he's the villain. And I don't think he's portrayed as a villainous banker necessarily. He's just a banker who's a villain.
Right. Both men were in banking.
Yeah, they were both basically bankers. And it's not like Frank Capra's presenting businessmen as a class, as villains. He has the best friend, Sam Wainwright, goes into the plastics business or investing, and he becomes a rich person with all kinds of money and comes to George's aid in the end. And he's not a villain. He's a hero. He saves people. He's trying to save George in the end. So I don't think this is a ironclad case where the story is trying to villainize bankers or businessmen.
And yeah, exactly. And I mean, obviously, there's a tendency in Hollywood generally to do that. But let's remember that as much as there were bad businessmen in Atlas Shrugged, like Orrin Boyle, who wanted to shut down Reardon, Rand showed some businessmen could be bad too. But
right.
It's not like she just showed bankers were bad. She was showing, or the Capra was showing that bankers were bad. They were showing that some could be bad, some could be good. The problem with Potter is that he spent most of his time trying to destroy the Baileys and keep people in the slums than actually trying to build something.
Right. That's the essence of his evilness, is that he's a heartless person who doesn't care about other people and doesn't really care about building up his community. He cares about owning everything and controlling people. I mean, he's in a wheelchair and makes someone wheel him around all the time. But he's got like a henchman, so who's also in on the scheme to take the money or keep the money from Uncle Billy's deposit. That guy was right there when saw everything happen. He's basically a henchman for Potter.
Right.
And Potter, so it's clearly expressed in the movie that Potter just wants control of everything. He says it himself, like the building alone is like the last thing he hasn't been able to get his hands on and control. And
right, he openly admits that.
Yeah, and then he tries to trick George by offering him a high-paying job, to destroy it or undermine the building alone. But then George catches on to it. So he's a trickster. He's a unscrupulous person in general. And he's just no good. So I don't think you can sympathize much with Henry Potter. It's like the movie doesn't portray all businessmen as bad or anything like that. And Potter is just a morally flawed or bad individual.
Right. And, then Yaron ultimately repeats his charge that Bailey's an altruistic second-hander before tying it back to why Yaron's not conservative.
So this is where I am not a conservative. Conservatives love this movie because they want to have their altruism and their happy ending and their capitalism. And you can't. This is why you're losing. This is why you have to lose.
So I don't know why. I remember one time Yaron said everything's political now. And yet he wants to turn this movie into some political litmus test. So yeah. It's not just conservatives who love this movie. It's just people in general. It's a classic Christmas movie now.
I agree. You may be saying part of why he doesn't like it, but to me, the whole you have to lose with all, with wanting to make others happy, or George must be unhappy. It has a whiff of determinism to it, that things must progress this way. I mean, yes, in an idealized and an artistic way, we like that, but sometimes things don't work out exactly that way. Tragedy can happen, things like, misplacing $8,000. Yaron is not making a fine enough distinction between altruism and benevolence. Why is it wrong to want it all? That's what growing the pie is about. That's the American dream. If these people want to, they still believe in their conventional morality and want to make money so they can be more generous to others, is that the, worst thing in the world? I mean, it's like saying you want Reardon metal to be lighter and stronger than steel. Who are you to want it all?
Yeah, it's really I would characterize it as the distinction between altruism and charity. So yeah, so even objectivists will agree that there are forms of charity which are beneficial to you, even if you're a rational egoist. Now, religious people might not look upon charity in the same light, but I think this movie is very close to the objectivist view of charity. It's more about building up your community because you value your community, or helping someone because you value that person, and they're not suffering through their own faults. It's an accident, or they have some disability or something. So you want to help people out of the generosity that you can provide them and the value you see in them. And that's kind of how George is. George values his friends and his community, his town. And so he helps them out. He doesn't charge them enormous prices or interest. He charges what he needs to survive and what they can afford. So he wants to give them good things. Like, he wants good things and he wants them to have good things. So he doesn't want to, I think he, as a moral person, he would feel bad if he had all this money sitting around and, sitting in the bank like Mr. Potter and just tried to like control everything. He doesn't really want to control everything like Potter. He wants to have friends and community and see everything grow and be nice.
Yeah, he lent money for these houses to get built and for wealth to be created. That wasn't just altruism, that's how the pie grows. And just as further evidence that George is not primarily an altruist, here's a clip of him talking about his father when urging to keep the building and loan in business.
Why he ever started this cheap penny ante building and loan, I'll never know, but neither you nor anybody else can say anything against his character, because his whole life was, why, in the 25 years since he and Uncle Billy started this thing, he never once thought of himself. Isn't that right, Uncle Billy? He didn't save enough money to send Harry to school, let alone me, but he did help a few people get out of your slums, Mr. Potter. And what's wrong with that? Well, here, you're all businessmen here. Doesn't it make them better citizens? Doesn't it make them better customers?
Yeah, so I imagine you're on. Oh, go ahead.
To say he, never thought of himself, that's just an appeal to conventional morality, including the board he was trying to sell. But, he ultimately appeals to their self-interest, that, having them have this, access to funds makes them better citizens and better people. An altruist would not say that.
Yeah. I mean, an altruist would have a more philosophical view of sacrifice. I mean, he wouldn't be talking about, how his building and loan was a success because the people he helped can help the community, or there wouldn't be some secondary benefit to all of this. It would be, I'm just sacrificing myself because other people need it more.
Exactly.
But let's see. So I wanted to say something else about that scene, is that a lot of people would probably focus only on the part where George says his father never saved enough money to send his children to college or something like that. Well, you also have to take into consideration that there could be other motives for why his father didn't try to get as much money as he could and then give it to his sons. Maybe he wanted his sons to stay in town and help him with the business. Maybe it was a business operation. Maybe that was his value. It wasn't to send his family away and become something else somewhere else. You as a father, I'm not a father, but if you have children, you have your own value system and your own desires, and you basically want, I think a good father would want to raise his child to have options, right, to do what he wants in life. But if you start pressuring them to go to college, then that's what they will end up doing, right? So if, I don't know, you can imagine other scenarios where Henry Potter wouldn't want to send George to college just because he saved money for college.
Yeah, they had a conversation about it, actually, where even after the money was saved, he asked George not to, he suggested that he stay at the bank because he had a natural knack for it. And George said he didn't want to go. And after hearing that, his dad said, "Hey, then I want you to go."
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not like George couldn't make the money. George worked at the bank and he actually made enough money. He was going to go off and go on adventures and go to college. So I think one of the skills his father did give him was the value of working making money. You see George as a young boy in the pharmacy working and making money and saving. So, I mean, is that a better lesson his father could teach him, as opposed to his father just paying for his college, sending him off and just on a free ride?
Yeah, I mean, it just he was conflicted. He was somewhat questioning his father's choices. He said he didn't even know why his father did it. That's part of what he kind of figures out by the end of the movie, because his father said what they were doing was important when he said, I want to do something important with my life. And what he realized by the end is that he was doing something important with his family and his friends and, helping to build his community.
Right. There is that scene between George and his father where George is saying he wants to run off and go on adventures. And his father says, well, it'd be nice, to have you at the building and loan. And then George says something like, the crummy, he calls it the crummy building and loan. And he doesn't really see the value of the building loan. He wants to go and build things elsewhere, and he says something like, I want to do important things. And his father tries to stress the fact that he thinks he's doing an important thing with the building and loan. He's helping people who don't have to crawl to Potter. He's helping them get a loan so they can have a house of their own and build their own family. And that's an important thing, is the community.
It's funny because he calls it a crummy building and loan back then, but after he comes back into the reality in which he exists, he says, Merry Christmas, you old beautiful building and loan.
Right. He starts to, his perspective has changed and he sees everything as wonderful now. Before he has that transformative experience with the angel, he starts calling his wife wonderful. Like he calls his wife Mary wonderful like 3 times, I think, in one scene. And she really is a central figure. And we're not stressing other characters as much, but his wife Mary is a saintly figure in the story. And
I was going to say, you may be losing some of our people when you compare George to being Christ-like.
Well, he is.
Because that's sort of making the altruist argument.
So what I would say about that is you have to understand that this is a religious-based movie, and it's about Christmas. And Christmas is about Christ. And it's about a religious perspective, but it's not all bad. It's not all miracles and all that. What It's a Wonderful Life is also about is a Tom Sawyer spirit. Like I said, George isn't only a Christ figure, he's a Tom Sawyer figure. So what Capra's doing is he's blending, there's a hybrid thing going on here. You have to think of George as both Christ-like and Sawyer-like.
And what characteristics of Sawyer are you talking about? I mean,
Tom Sawyer was an adventurous boy who went off with his friend Huckleberry Finn. If you look into this, you'll find many parallels. There's a reason why Capra put that book in the movie. There's many parallels between The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and It's a Wonderful Life. Just another example is that Tom Sawyer's girlfriend was named Becky Thatcher.
Right.
And if you take out a few letters from her last name, you get Hatch, which is the last name of George's wife, Mary Hatch.
Okay.
And there's also a character of Mary in Tom Sawyer, and Mary is his cousin, I think, and she teaches him the Bible. And so in Tom Sawyer, Mary is a very saintly figure. And there's, of course, Mary is George's girlfriend and wife in the movie, and she's a saintly figure who teaches George, the value of family and home life. So Tom Sawyer was an adventurous spirit who eventually saves people. He also saves people, kind of like George. He saves the guy who was on trial incorrectly on trial for murder. He saves his girlfriend from the caves. There are other examples that you can find which parallels Tom Sawyer and It's a Wonderful Life.
I mean, the main thing, we talked about benevolence, but just the benevolent sense of life and everyone coming together, and no one was asking for a government bailout for George or anything. It just that's the part, and the fact that you see these people that George didn't have any expectation when he saved his brother's life, but his brother loved him with all his heart and wanted, flew back in the middle of getting the Congressional Medal of Honor when he heard that George was in trouble. I mean, that's just the spirit of just loving. And that's why I tear up every time I see it.
Yeah, that's another aspect I don't think Yaron appreciates too much, is the sentimentality of the movie. It's a very sentimental movie with all of these heartfelt scenes. And you mentioned the scene where his brother comes back at the end. His brother toasts him and says, "To the richest man in town." Mm-hmm. And of course, by that he doesn't mean that he has the most money. He means he has the most friends. So that's also going to the theme of the value of friendships and your community. Basically, the whole town comes to his house in the end to save him.
Yeah.
And you got to ask yourself, why does that happen? Of course, it's a contrivance of the writer, but it's the ultimate, it's the apex of the movie. It's the whole point of the movie. The whole point of the movie isn't altruism. If the whole point was altruism, George would probably die in the end, like a sacrificial animal. But
like Yaron was hoping.
Yeah. Yeah, but he doesn't. He's saved. He's saved by the community.
What you said about friends, I just, because I think I remember hearing that Rand didn't like How to Win Friends and Influence People with the title when it came out. But there is something about, Yaron had a recent debate with Yoram Hazony, the head of the National Conservatives, about individualism versus conservatives. And I think Yaron did pretty good in the debate. We may go into it once it's more available on YouTube, but the main point is that if there was a good zinger that Yoram got on Yaron, it was when he said, he went to Yaron's book and said that, I want to be as free as we would be on a desert island. And Yaron said, no one wants to be that free. It's what Rand talked about the benefits that we get from being able to share knowledge and best practices and a division of labor. You shouldn't be seeking that, a life without friends, or friends are valuable to the extent you believe that humanity is good.
Well, it's a weird context shift. You hear that all the time, no man is an island, or I guess he was trying to reverse that idea and say that I want to be the man on the island. But no one really wants to be trapped on a deserted island, right? So it's the idea, I guess, is that in society he wants to be able to do whatever the heck he wants to do, but that's not the context. It's a complete shift. It's a total change in context from being on a desert island to a society. So you have to understand that people form societies for reason, and the reason is to benefit everybody in that society. So somehow individualists need to work with that concept and figure out, how do you apply individual freedom and sovereignty to a social context and what that means.
Well, we will be fighting that fight all into 2022 as well. We're going to have a happy new year and just get back at it. Starting, we got another show first week of January I'm looking forward to. We've had a great run this year. We've had a lot of really good guests, and I'm glad we're doing the show together.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and really I like these shows where we analyze art. We've done a couple of them in a row now, one on painting and now one on this movie. So I hope we do more of this type of thing, and I love the interviews as well. So maybe we can mix the two again. But happy Hanukkah and happy New Year, and I look forward to talking to you in the future.
Great. Well, this same to you. This has been the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff, along with William Swig, and we will see you next year.